At my wife's company dinner, one of her coworkers was laughing and said, "How does it feel to be a loser? Your wife is the breadwinner of your home." The whole table laughed, including my wife. Everyone laughed, except me. I didn't react. I just sat there with a calm smile and then looked at the CEO and asked, "How does it feel to know that this loser owns 90% of your company?" The moment those words left my mouth, his expression went completely pale. You know that strange feeling when you're standing in a crowded room, but feel completely invisible? That was me that night. I was sitting at Dana's company dinner, holding a glass of whiskey that tasted like pure disappointment. The Hilton ballroom was full of luxury and spectacle. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in warm golden light, reflecting off white linen-covered tables. Waiters in bow ties moved smoothly between conversations about profits, quarterly reports, and market strategies. Everyone there looked polished, successful, and important, especially my wife Dana. She looked stunning in her emerald green dress that fit her perfectly. She was completely in her element, laughing with her colleagues, using expressive gestures as she described landing a major client. Watching her from across the table, I felt like I didn't belong in a room full of corporate predators. These people weren't my world. Honestly, I wasn't even sure they were truly hers either, but she blended in effortlessly with their universe of power, ambition, and money. A sharp voice pulled me out of my thoughts. It was Travis Miller, Dana's coworker, and, frankly, the most irritating person I had to deal with at these events. He was the type who always had perfect hair, a forced grin, and an ego bigger than his paycheck. He raised his champagne glass a little too high, slightly unsteady from drinking. "Come over here, buddy," he called out. I forced a polite smile and walked over to the group, where he stood with several of Dana's colleagues. The CEO, Arthur Granger, was there too, dressed sharply, looking every bit the experienced executive. A few other managers stood nearby, faces familiar, but names already fading from my memory. Dana joined me, slipping her arm through mine with a practiced, corporate-friendly smile she used at these events. "So, Jordan," Travis said loudly, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting. "What's it like being married to our rising star here?" He pointed his glass toward Dana, spilling a bit of champagne on the white tablecloth. "Must be nice having a sugar mama." A few people chuckled. I stayed calm, expression neutral. It wasn't the first time Travis had tried to provoke me, and it likely wouldn't be the last. He had some odd obsession with undermining men who weren't chasing corporate dominance, especially when their wives were successful. He kept going, encouraged by the laughter around him. "Seriously, though," he said, voice getting louder as more people turned to listen, "what do you even do all day while Dana is out there closing deals? Play video games? Watch Netflix?" More laughter followed. Dana's grip on my arm tightened slightly. I glanced at her expecting at least some discomfort, some resistance, but instead, she was smiling. Not awkwardly, not nervously. She looked amused, like this was just harmless entertainment. Travis turned up the volume even more. "I mean, let's be honest here," he said, now fully feeding off the crowd. "Jordan seems like a nice guy, but were you really?" Then he looked directly at me. "What's it like being a loser? Must be weird having your wife pay for everything, right?" The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were true, but because of the way the room reacted. For a brief second, everything went silent. Then the table erupted in laughter. Even nearby guests turned to see what was going on. And then I saw Dana laughing too. Not politely, not uncomfortably. She was genuinely laughing along with them. That moment settled something cold inside me. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building a life together. And here I was, being laughed at in front of strangers like I was nothing more than a punchline. I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting it all wash over me. Then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the whiskey. Maybe it was years of holding my tongue at events like this. Or maybe I was simply done being treated like an accessory to my wife's success. I smiled, but this time it wasn't forced. It was calm, almost unsettling. The laughter started to fade as people noticed the change in my expression. "You know what, Travis?" I said evenly. "You're not entirely wrong. From your point of view, it probably does look that way. Then I turned to Arthur Granger, the CEO, whose smile was already starting to fade as he sensed something was off. Arthur, I continued, still smiling. How does it feel to know that this loser owns 90% of your company? Silence fell instantly. The entire ballroom froze. Arthur went completely still, his glass halfway to his lips, face turning pale in seconds. Dana's hand slipped away from my arm. She stared at me, confused, like she was trying to process what she had just heard. Travis's confident grin disappeared completely. What? Dana whispered. I looked around the table at all the faces that had been laughing moments earlier. Did I stutter? I said calmly. Or systems. You remember that startup that merged with Nextra 5 years ago? The one that saved this company from collapsing? I paused as recognition slowly spread across Arthur's face. That was mine, I said. Still is. A glass shattered on the floor. Dana had dropped hers. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like a stain that couldn't be ignored. The room erupted into chaos. People whispering, chairs shifting, voices overlapping in shock and disbelief. But I was already done. I adjusted my tie, took one last look at Dana's stunned expression, and turned away from the table. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear the panic behind me. Arthur trying to restore order. Dana calling my name. Travis demanding confirmation, as if reality itself had just broken. But I kept walking. For years, I'd stayed quiet, played the supportive husband, stayed in the background while everyone assumed they understood my place in the world. Now they knew better. You should never underestimate the person you laugh at. The marble floor echoed under my steps as I left the ballroom behind. I could feel every gaze burning into my back, but I didn't stop, because in that moment, the game had already changed. I knew, without even looking, that dozens of corporate vultures were stretching their necks just to watch the quiet husband make his dramatic exit. Good. Let them stare. Let them wonder how badly they had messed up by underestimating the man they had been treating like Dana's pet dog for the past 5 years. I was almost at the revolving doors when I heard the sharp click-clack of heels hitting the marble behind me. Jordan, wait. Dana's voice was tight with panic, slicing through the background noise of the hotel lobby. I didn't slow down. If anything, I walked faster, hands buried in my pockets as I moved through clusters of tourists and business travelers. Jordan, damn it, stop. The desperation in her tone was something I hadn't heard in years. Not since her father's heart attack, when she thought she might lose him. Still, I kept walking. If she wanted to chase me, fine. She could chase me all the way to the parking garage if she really wanted. I heard her stumble slightly. Those designer heels weren't made for running. And then suddenly she was right behind me, breathing hard. What the hell do you mean you own the company? She demanded, grabbing my arm and trying to spin me around. I stopped, but I didn't turn right away. I just stood there for a moment, listening to her uneven breathing, feeling her manicured fingers digging into my jacket sleeve. When I finally turned to face her, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her perfect makeup was starting to smear under her eyes, and the emerald dress that had looked flawless an hour ago was now wrinkled from her frantic run across the hotel. You really don't know, do you? I asked, studying her expression carefully. The confusion there looked real. But then again, Dana had always been good at playing whatever role suited the moment. You honestly have no idea who you married. Don't be cryptic with me right now, she snapped, slipping back into her corporate executive tone. Explain how you can possibly own 90% of Nextra when you've been unemployed for the past 3 years. Unemployed. The word hit harder than it should have, even though I had heard her use it before when talking to friends. Never to my face, of course, but I had overheard enough to know how she really saw our arrangement. Her successful career, my so-called retirement, which she clearly viewed as long-term unemployment. So that's what you think I've been doing? I let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Sitting around unemployed while you bring home the money? Well, what else would you call it? She shot back, her voice rising. A few people walking past started to stare, but she was too agitated to care. You haven't had a real job since you sold that little software company back. That little software company I cut in was Orion Systems. And I didn't just sell it, Dana. I merged it with a failing tech company called Nextra Corporation. Ring any bells? The color drained from her face as the pieces began to fall into place. I could practically see the realization forming as she recalled conversations from years ago, back when she was a junior analyst and I was still fully active in the business world. "That's impossible," she whispered, but I could tell she was remembering. Orion Systems that was a major player. The merger saved Nextra from bankruptcy. It was worth millions. Try hundreds of millions, I corrected. And it's still worth that much. Present tense, Dana. Because I never sold my shares. I just stepped back from daily operations and let Arthur run things while I focused on other priorities. "Other priorities?" she asked, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. Now, she just sounded confused and maybe a little afraid. "Like being your husband," I said simply. "Like cooking dinner every night while you worked late. Like handling the mortgage, the car insurance, and all the financial details you never wanted to deal with. Like supporting your career while everyone assumed I was some kind of deadbeat." She stared at me for a long moment, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the reality standing in front of her. All those times she introduced me as someone who used to work in tech. All those dinners where she joked about me being retired at 45. All those corporate events where people like Travis felt comfortable mocking me because she never corrected them. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she finally asked. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I own," I replied. "I wanted to know that if I lost everything tomorrow, you'd still stay." I paused. But the moment people thought I had nothing, they treated me like I was nothing, including you. The words hung between us. She opened her mouth to argue, but neither of us needed her to finish. We both knew the truth. When Travis called me a loser tonight, when he mocked me for being supported by my wife, when he reduced me to nothing in front of everyone, she had laughed along with him. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "You didn't want to know?" I corrected. "Every time someone made a joke about me being unemployed or living off your success, you smiled and let it pass. You never once defended me or told them they were wrong. Jordan, they all forgot who I was." I cut in, my voice harder now. "But I didn't forget. I never forgot that Arthur Granger came to me 15 years ago, begging me to save his company from bankruptcy. I never forgot signing the merger that made me the majority shareholder of this entire operation. I never forgot that every paycheck you've ever received from Nextra was, in reality, coming from me." Her legs seemed to weaken, and she grabbed a nearby pillar to steady herself. "This is insane," she said. "You're telling me that all this time I've been working my way up the corporate ladder, fighting for promotions and respect. You've been working for your husband?" I finished for her. "Yeah. Ironic, isn't it?" I could see it all hitting her at once, like a speeding train she couldn't step out of the way of. Every meeting she had attended, every decision she had contributed to, every moment she had felt proud of her independence and success, all of it had existed under the umbrella of a company I controlled. Her coworkers, her career, her entire professional identity had been built on a foundation I laid long before she ever knew my name. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly, almost in a whisper. I looked at her standing there in that expensive dress, suddenly looking smaller, more fragile than I'd seen her in years. A part of me wanted to soften, to reassure her, to say everything would eventually return to normal. But another part of me, the part that had been dismissed, laughed at, and humiliated, wasn't ready for forgiveness. "Now," I said, adjusting my tie, "I stopped being invisible. I stopped letting people treat me like a joke. And maybe, just maybe, I remind everyone at Nextra exactly who's been paying their salaries all this time." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving my wife standing alone in the hotel lobby, finally realizing that the man she had married was not who she thought he was. The drive home felt like a blur of passing streetlights and restless thoughts. My hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white, and I kept replaying Dana's expression over and over in my head. The shock, the disbelief, the way her face collapsed when the truth finally hit her. The way she had grabbed that pillar as if the ground beneath her was disappearing, which in a way it probably was. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the adrenaline from the confrontation had started to fade, replaced by something colder, sharper, more deliberate. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house in front of me. The house I had bought with Orion money, though Dana had always believed it came from a vague inheritance I once mentioned in passing. Another omission in a marriage that now felt built on layers of them. I finally got out and walked straight through the front door, heading directly to my home office, the one room in the house Dana rarely entered. She always called it my man cave, a label that made me uncomfortable, but I never corrected her. Let her think I spent my days in here watching videos or playing games. The reality was far different. From the outside, the office looked ordinary. A desk, a computer, a few framed photos, bookshelves filled with technical manuals and business journals. But the real value was hidden behind a false panel in the built-in shelving. I pressed the hidden latch, and the panel slid open to reveal a fireproof safe containing the most important documents of my life. I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Nextra Holdings and spread its contents across the desk like a hand being laid down in a decisive game. Every document told the same story, but seeing them together again after so many years still gave me a strange sense of power. These weren't just contracts. They were proof that Jordan Rivers, the man everyone believed was simply living off his wife's success, had actually been the one controlling everything from the beginning. The original merger papers had yellowed slightly at the edges, but Arthur Granger's signature remained sharp and unmistakable at the bottom of each page. I could still remember that day, 15 years ago, when he sat in this very office, sweating through his expensive suit as he begged me to save his collapsing company. Back then, Nextra was bleeding money, losing clients rapidly, and only months away from complete failure. Arthur had heard through industry channels that I was considering expanding Orion Systems, and he had arrived with what was essentially a surrender disguised as a proposal. "Just name your terms," he had said, his voice unsteady. "We need this merger to survive." I had been generous, perhaps more than I should have been. Instead of dismantling Nextra entirely and absorbing its assets, I structured the deal to preserve its brand while granting myself controlling interest, 90% ownership, along with full voting rights and veto power over all major decisions. Arthur kept his title as CEO and a comfortable salary. His employees kept their jobs. On the surface, everyone benefited, especially me. But the most brilliant part of the arrangement had been the blind trust structure I insisted on. My shares were placed under a private investment firm, and my identity was kept completely confidential. To the public, Nextra had been saved by an anonymous investor who preferred to remain in the shadows. Only Arthur and a small group of lawyers knew the truth, and they were bound by strict non-disclosure agreements. I opened the trust documents and scanned until I found the clause I was looking for. There was, clearly written, "The beneficial owner retains the right to assume direct control of all holdings upon written notice to the trustee and the board of directors." In simple terms, I could step out from behind the curtain and take full control of the company whenever I chose. The real question was whether I wanted to. For 5 years, I had been content letting Arthur manage the daily operations while I collected dividends and stayed in the background, enjoying my quiet retirement. The money had always been more than enough. Hell, Dana's salary was basically pocket change compared to what Nextra was generating. I'd never needed the spotlight or the corporate power games. I'd already been through that world, done everything it had to offer, and decided I preferred a simpler life. But tonight had changed something fundamental. Tonight, I had been publicly humiliated by people who depended on my generosity for their livelihoods. Travis Miller, that smug bastard, had called me a loser while literally cashing checks from company I owned. Dana had laughed at jokes about her unemployed husband while building her career on the foundation I had provided. Even Arthur, who knew exactly who I was, had stood there and said nothing while it all happened. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus Trent's number. Marcus had been my lawyer since the early days of Orion Systems, and one of the very few people who knew everything. It was nearly midnight, but Marcus was a night owl who often stayed up late handling complex corporate matters. He answered on the second ring. "Jordan, it's late. Even for you. Everything all right? I need you to prepare some documents," I said immediately, cutting straight to it. "I want a full financial audit of Nextra's executive compensation, corporate credit card spending, and any possible conflicts of interest within a leadership team. There was a long pause on the line. Jordan, what's going on? You haven't shown any interest in Nextra's operations for years. Let's just say I had a wake-up call, I replied. Also, I want a meeting scheduled with the board of directors. It's time they meet their largest shareholder face-to-face. Are you certain about this? Once you step out from the blind trust, there's no going back. Your anonymity is gone permanently. I looked around my office, taking in everything that represented my hidden empire. Financial reports showing profits that would make Dana's head spin, email chains with Fortune 500 CEOs who still treated me as a serious power player in tech, investment records that had quietly grown for years while everyone assumed I was just some house husband. Marcus, I said finally, I've been invisible for too long. It's time people remember who they're dealing with. All right, he said, and I could hear him already reaching for his legal pad. I'll prepare the audit request by morning, and I'll contact the board for an emergency session. But Jordan, whatever happened tonight, make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. Don't worry about my reasons, I said. Just make sure everything is legally airtight. Because if I'm doing this, I'm doing it properly. After I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the documents spread across my desk. Tomorrow, the corporate world that had forgotten Jordan Rivers was about to wake up in a very unpleasant way. And Dana, she was about to learn that the man she had been taking for granted was actually the most powerful figure in her entire professional life. I carefully returned everything to the safe and locked it away. But this time, I knew it wouldn't stay hidden for long. I woke the next morning to the sound of Dana's heels clicking upstairs, her usual pre-work routine already in motion. Coffee brewing, the TV news playing softly in the kitchen, the familiar rhythm of a corporate executive preparing to take on another day. Except today wasn't going to be like any other day, and she had no idea what was coming. I stayed in bed a little longer, listening to her move around the house. Through the walls, I could hear her on the phone, likely speaking to her assistant, going over her schedule, discussing client meetings and quarterly targets. The same conversations she had repeated for years, completely unaware that every decision she made at work ultimately traced back to me. When I finally entered the kitchen, she was already there in her navy blue power suit, scrolling through emails while sipping coffee from her favorite mug, the one that said Boss Lady in gold lettering. I had bought it for her as a joke on her birthday last year. She had started using it seriously. "Morning," she said without looking up, her voice neutral, carefully controlled, as if last night's revelation might have been a dream she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Morning," I replied, pouring coffee and leaning against the counter. She finally looked up. I saw it immediately, the confusion, the unease still lingering in her eyes. "Jordan, about last night." "Don't," I said gently, cutting her off. "We don't need to turn it into something dramatic. You were just having a laugh with your coworkers." I understand. The relief that crossed her face was almost immediate. She genuinely thought I was letting it go. I was going back to being the quiet husband who smiled politely while people treated him like background noise. "They were just joking," she said quickly. "You know how Travis gets when he drinks. He doesn't mean anything by it." "Of course not," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "He was just being Travis. No harm done." "Exactly," she said, visibly relaxing. "Exactly." She looked so relieved that, if she hadn't been worried about wrinkling her suit, she might have hugged me. "I'm glad you're not gonna make a big deal out of it. I mean, we both know you're not actually, unemployed or anything like that. You've got your investments and your consulting work, right?" I nodded slowly. "My little side projects." She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek before heading toward the garage, her heels clicking with a newly restored sense of confidence. "I'll probably be late tonight. We're working on a Morrison account, and you know how demanding those clients can be." "I won't wait up," I said. After she left, I stayed at the kitchen table with my laptop and began typing. The first email went to Arthur Granger. Short, direct, no unnecessary words. "Arthur, I need to discuss some concerns regarding Nextra's corporate culture and leadership practices. Please provide a full breakdown of executive compensation packages, expense accounts, and any potential conflicts of interest among senior management. I expect this information by end of business today. Thanks. Jordan Rivers. I read it twice before sending it. Arthur would likely have a heart attack the moment he saw my name in his inbox, especially after what happened the night before. 4 or 5 years, he had been hoping I would remain buried in silence. But now I was suddenly requesting full financial transparency like an activist shareholder. My phone started ringing before I had even finished my second cup of coffee. Marcus Trent's voice came through immediately, familiar and sharp. I've been up all night working on those documents you requested. Are you absolutely certain you want to move forward with this? More certain than I've been about anything in years, I replied. What do you have for me? Well, he said, papers rustling in the background. The audit request is airtight. As the majority shareholder, you absolutely have the right to inspect every aspect of the company's financial operations. I've also prepared a formal notice to the board requesting an emergency session. He paused. But Jordan, once I send this, there's no undo button. Everyone will know who you are. Good, I said. I'm done being invisible. There's something else, Marcus continued, and I could hear him flipping through documents. I ran a preliminary review of Nextra's recent activity, and I found some concerning patterns. That Travis Miller guy you mentioned, he's been directing contracts toward a construction firm owned by his cousin. It's not technically illegal, but definitely ethically questionable. Interesting, I said, though I wasn't really surprised. Men like Travis always had some kind of angle, some quiet way to bend the system for personal gain. There's more, Marcus added. Several executives have been using corporate credit cards for personal expenses. Expensive dinners, golf trips, even questionable client entertainment that looks more like family vacations. Arthur's oversight has been very relaxed. I felt a slow, cold smile form on my face. Arthur had gotten comfortable, maybe too comfortable. He probably believed his mysterious investor would never bother looking under the surface, never question how things were really being run as long as the profits kept flowing. Send everything, I said. The audit request, the board notice, all of it. It's time to shake things up. You got it, Marcus replied. But Jordan, just remember, you're about to go from the man behind the curtain to center stage. That's a major shift. It's going to affect more than just business. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the morning digging into Nextra's current operations myself. What I found wasn't encouraging. Arthur had allowed standards to slip, tolerated a growing toxic culture, and ignored questionable behavior as long as the financial results looked acceptable. The company I had saved 15 years ago had slowly turned into exactly the kind of corporate mess I had always despised. By noon, I was ready to act. I opened my laptop and drafted another email. This one was from Margaret Wu, Nextra's VP of Engineering. Margaret was one of the few people there I actually respected, brilliant, disciplined, and consistently overlooked by the same boys' club that dominated the executive floor. Margaret, I wrote, you don't know me personally, but I've been following your work at Nextra for some time. I believe you are exactly the kind of leadership the company needs. We should talk soon. Best regards, Jordan Rivers. I was about to hit send when my phone buzzed with a text from Dana. Everything okay at home? Arthur seems really stressed. He said he received a strange email this morning. I replied quickly. Everything's fine. Tell Arthur not to worry. I'm sure it will all sort itself out. But even as I sent it, I knew nothing was going to sort itself out. In fact, things were only about to become far more complicated for everyone at Nextra, starting with my wife. I sent the email to Margaret, leaned back in my chair, and waited for the chain reaction to begin. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a silent investor on the sidelines. I was back in the game, and I intended to win. The corporate rumor mill moves faster than a casino dealer in Vegas, and by 10 a.m., the first domino had already fallen. I was in my home office monitoring developments through a network of contacts I had maintained over the years when my phone started buzzing with updates from Marcus. Travis Miller just got called into HR, he texted. Official reason, review of conduct at corporate events. Unofficial reason, your audit request just lit a fire under Arthur. I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile forming. Travis had probably walked into that HR meeting thinking he was untouchable, the golden boy who could joke about losers and unemployed husbands without consequences. He was about to learn that actions always have a way of catching up, especially when the person you mocked owns the company you work for. My laptop chimed with an email from Arthur. The subject line read, "Urgent. Need to discuss." I could almost feel the panic behind it. I opened it. "Jordan, I received your request this morning and want to assure you that Nextra maintains the highest standards of corporate governance. Perhaps we could schedule a call to discuss your concerns in a more informal setting. I'm sure we can clear up any misunderstandings. Best regards, Arthur." Misunderstandings. That was almost amusing. The only misunderstanding was Arthur believing he could keep running things loosely while I stayed quietly in retirement. I typed back a short reply. "Arthur, I'm not interested in informal discussions. I want the full documentation I requested by 5 p.m. today, and I want a board meeting scheduled this week. No exceptions." While I was dealing with Arthur's attempt at damage control, the real chaos was already unfolding at Nextra's downtown headquarters. Marcus had a contact inside the building, a paralegal in the legal department, and she was feeding us information like something out of a corporate espionage story. Security just escorted Travis out of the building. Came the next update. They found traces of those construction contracts in his emails. He's been suspended pending investigation. I had to admit, Arthur was moving quickly. Travis had gone from company favorite to corporate liability in a matter of hours. But that only made sense. Arthur was likely terrified about what else might surface once I started digging deeper. My phone rang again. Dana's name appeared on the screen. I let go to voicemail. Then I listened. "Jordan, what is going on over there?" "Travis has been fired. Everyone is panicking about some audit, and Arthur looks like he's about to have a nervous breakdown. Call me back." Instead of calling her, I texted back. "Sounds like a normal Tuesday at the office. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about." But it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. The chain reaction I had set in motion that morning was only just beginning. And Dana, poor Dana, was right in the middle of it without even realizing it. She thought she was dealing with a routine corporate crisis, when in reality, she was watching her husband dismantle the very toxic system that had allowed people like Travis to thrive in the first place. By noon, Marcus called again with an update that immediately lifted my mood. "The board meeting is locked in for Thursday at 2 p.m. Arthur tried to delay it until next week, but the other board members are demanding answers about the audit request. They want to know who's been pulling strings behind the curtain all these years." "Perfect," I said. "What about the financials?" "Arthur's assistant sent a preliminary report," Marcus replied. "And you're going to like this. Travis wasn't the only one playing games. There's a whole pattern of questionable expenses and ethical violations across the executive team." I felt that familiar satisfaction rise again, that quiet confirmation that I had been right all along. They had grown comfortable, too comfortable. They thought my investment was a blank check, my silence a sign of weakness. They had treated my money like it was free and my trust like it was guaranteed. By 3 p.m., the rumor network inside Nextra was in full chaos. Dana kept texting me throughout the afternoon, each message more anxious than the last. They just suspended 2 more executives. People are saying there's going to be a full restructuring. The entire leadership team is panicking. Then came the message that told me everything I needed to know about where her priorities truly stood. "Jordan, please tell me you're not behind this. People are losing their jobs, and I can't afford to be caught in the middle. My career is everything to me." Her career, not our life, not our marriage, not our future. Her career, the very one built on the foundation I had quietly provided. She was more worried about protecting her professional image than understanding why her husband might finally be taking a stand. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Marcus and told him to speed everything up. "I want the board meeting moved to tomorrow if possible. Strike while the pressure is high." "Jordan, are you sure you don't want to ease into this? Maybe meet Arthur privately first." "No," I interrupted. "I've been easing into things for 15 years. It's time everyone remembers who's actually in control." By 5 p.m., Arthur had delivered the financial records I requested, and they were even worse than I had expected. Massive executive bonuses that bordered on outrageous corporate retreats disguised as luxury vacations, and a culture of nepotism and favoritism that would have embarrassed even a seasoned corrupt system. They had been treating Nextra like a personal vault while I stood quietly in the background, letting it happen. But that version of me, the quiet, patient Jordan Rivers, was gone. The man who smiled politely while being mocked at dinner parties no longer existed. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom and remind everyone exactly who owned the company. And if Dana didn't like it, she had had 15 years to understand who she was really married to. If she cared more about her career than her husband, then maybe it was time for both of us to reconsider what mattered most. The game had changed, and I was just getting started. Thursday morning arrived with a sharp, crisp autumn air that made everything feel more intense, more focused. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the tie on a charcoal gray Armani suit I hadn't worn in 3 years. It was perfectly tailored, a power suit worth more than most people's monthly income. Dana had already left early, saying she had damage control meetings before the board session that had the entire company on edge. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own wife was trying to contain the fallout of my decisions, completely unaware she was married to the very source of the storm. The drive to Nextra headquarters felt like stepping back in time. I had been in that building many times over the years, but always as Dana's quiet husband, the man who showed up occasionally to corporate events, holiday parties, and company gatherings. Today was different. Today I was walking through those glass doors as Jordan Rivers, the majority shareholder and a man who had been orchestrating everything from the shadows for 15 years. Marcus met me in the parking garage, dressed sharply in a navy suit and carrying a briefcase that looked more expensive than most cars. "Ready for this?" he asked, studying me closely. "I've been ready for 15 years, I said. I just didn't know it. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, except for soft jazz playing overhead. I watched the numbers rise, 10, 15, 20, and felt something shift inside me with every floor we passed. By the time we reached the boardroom level, the version of me who had stayed hidden for years was gone. What remained was someone ready to take back what had always been his. Arthur was waiting outside the boardroom, pacing nervously like a trapped animal. The moment he saw me step out of the elevator, all the color drained from his face. "Jordan," he said quickly, extending his hand. With forced enthusiasm. "It's been too long." "You look well, Arthur," I replied, shaking his hand and immediately noticing how clammy his palm felt. "I bet you never expected to see me back in this building." "Well, you're always welcome here. This is you're obviously a valued." He stumbled over his words like a nervous teenager, sweat already forming on his forehead despite the building's air conditioning. "My company," I finished for him. "Go ahead and say it, Arthur. This is my company." Before he could respond, the boardroom doors opened, and I got my first look at the people who had been steering my investment for the past 15 years. 5 board members, all seated around the table, looking confused and mildly irritated at being pulled into an emergency meeting. They likely assumed this was about some minor operational issue Arthur could smooth over with corporate jargon and vague reassurances. They were about to realize just how wrong they were. "Gentlemen," Arthur said as we entered, trying to regain composure, "I'd like you to meet Jordan Rivers." The silence that followed was almost perfect. You could practically see the mental search happening as they tried to place the name. Had they heard it before? Did it matter? Then, one by one, recognition appeared on their faces like a sunrise breaking over distant mountains. "Wait," said Patricia Hensley, the only woman on the board. "Jordan Rivers, the Orion Systems, Jordan Rivers." "The very same," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table as though I belonged there, because I did. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you all in person." What followed was immediate corporate chaos. Papers shuffled rapidly. Whispered conversations broke out. Confused glances were exchanged across the long mahogany table. Arthur looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. "I think there's been some confusion," said Robert Chun, the board's treasurer. "Our records indicate Orion Systems was acquired through a blind trust structure. The beneficial owner has always remained confidential." "Not confidential," I corrected. "Private. There's a difference." Arthur here has known exactly who I am from the beginning. Haven't you, Arthur? Arthur cleared his throat and gave a reluctant nod. Yes. Mr. Rivers chose to remain anonymous while the company stabilized after the merger. 15 years is a long time to stabilize, I said, opening the briefcase Marcus had prepared. Long enough for people to forget that actions still have consequences. I spread the documents across the table like a dealer laying out a winning hand. Executive compensation reports, expense breakdowns, internal audits, evidence of Travis's nepotistic dealings, and far more than they were prepared to see. This, I continued calmly, though my voice carried enough weight to silence the room, is what I've been funding. Executives using corporate credit cards for personal vacations. Hiring decisions based on favoritism instead of merit. A corporate culture that thinks humiliation and disrespect are acceptable business practices. Patricia leaned in, scanning the pages. These are serious claims, Mr. Rivers. If even part of this is accurate. It's all accurate, I said, and it's only the surface. When people believe no one is watching, they get careless. They stop running a company and start treating it like a personal playground. Arthur was openly sweating now. Jordan, he said weakly, if there have been irregularities, I'm sure we can resolve this through proper channels. The proper channel, I interrupted, is me finally stepping in and taking control of the company I've owned from the beginning. I placed the final document on the table. A formal notice of intent, drafted by Marcus the night before. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder to assume direct operational control of Netra Corporation. Arthur, your resignation is accepted with immediate effect. The room exploded into shocked voices, but I raised a hand, silencing them. I'm not finished. Travis Miller's termination will stand, obviously, but he won't be the last. There will be a full restructuring of leadership and a complete reset of company culture. I stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Somewhere down there, Dana was likely sitting in her office, completely unaware that her husband had just removed her boss and taken control of the company she had been climbing within for years. I've spent 15 years watching this company from the shadows, I said, turning back to face them. I've seen how people behave when they think no one important is paying attention. I've seen how quickly standards disappear when accountability is removed. I returned to the table, but remained standing. Well, I continued. Someone important was always watching. And the money keeps flowing because I allow it to. But that arrangement is now changing. Arthur slumped back in his chair like all strength had left him. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now, I said with a calm smile that held no warmth. We rebuild this company from the ground up, with accountability, integrity, and respect. All those words you've been using in annual reports while doing the exact opposite. I gathered my papers, closed the briefcase, and prepared to leave. Oh, and Arthur, I added, pausing at the door, start clearing out your office. Office by the end of the day. Security would escort him out once he finished collecting his things. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the chaos breaking out behind me. Frantic phone calls, raised voices, the sound of a corporate house of cards finally collapsing in real time. But for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The quiet version of Jordan Rivers was officially gone. Long live the king. The emergency board vote took place at exactly 6:47 p.m., and it was easily the most satisfying 17 minutes of my professional life. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, watching 5 board members who had likely never questioned a decision in their careers suddenly scrambling to distance themselves from Arthur's leadership, all in favor of accepting Arthur Granger's resignation, effective immediately. I asked, even though we all understood it wasn't really a resignation once security was involved. 5 hands went up instantly. Even Patricia Hensley, who had worked with Arthur for over a decade, didn't hesitate to abandon him. Corporate loyalty always lasted right up until it became inconvenient. Motion carries, I said. Now, let's move on to restructuring. The next item on the agenda was Travis Miller's permanent termination, which passed unanimously. No one seemed interested in defending the man who had been redirecting contracts to his cousin's construction company while insulting the actual owner of the firm. Funny how quickly priorities changed once people realized who was signing the checks. But the real shock came when I announced Arthur's replacement. I am nominating Margaret Wu for Chief Executive Officer. The silence in the room was immediate and absolute. Robert Chun looked at me like I had just suggested handing the company over to someone unqualified to run a department store. Margaret Wu from engineering? He asked. She has no executive experience. She has no executive experience, I replied, because this company has spent 15 years promoting people based on golf games instead of results. Margaret has been delivering results while your previous leadership was busy approving expense accounts. I had done my research on Margaret over the years. While men like Travis entertained clients at overpriced dinners, she was solving real problems in engineering. While Arthur gave speeches about innovation, she was actually doing the work. She was exactly the kind of leader Nextra had been ignoring and exactly what it needed. With all due respect, Mr. Rivers, Patricia said carefully, promoting someone from engineering directly to CEO is a major shift. Perhaps we should consider external candidates. With all due respect, Patricia, I cut in, I own this company. Margaret Wu is the CEO. Let's vote. Another vote. Another unanimous result. It was remarkable how quickly opinions aligned when job security became a factor. By 7:30 p.m., Margaret was sitting at the boardroom table looking as though she had just been handed a winning lottery ticket, which, in a way, she had. I had called her from her department barely 20 minutes earlier with a simple instruction. Margaret, I need you in the boardroom. Now. She arrived still dressed for work, khakis and a plain polo shirt, completely out of place among tailored suits and polished shoes. But once I explained everything, once I told her she was about to become CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, something shifted in her immediately. Her eyes lit up with a focused intensity one hadn't seen in that room for years. I want you to run this company with respect, I told her as the board members began filtering out, already dialing phones and preparing damage control. Respect for employees, respect for customers, and respect for the fact that this company exists to solve problems, not to feed egos. Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening. Mr. Rivers, I don't know what to say. I've spent 10 years here watching waste, politics, and missed opportunities, wishing someone would actually care about doing things right instead of just looking successful. Well, now you're the one responsible for fixing it, I said. Full control. My full support. Clean house as you see fit. As I stood to leave, I noticed Dana waiting in the hallway outside the boardroom. Her face was pale, almost drained of color. She had clearly heard everything. Arthur's firing, the emergency meeting, the restructuring, all of it. And for the first time since this began, she wasn't looking at me with confusion or anger. She was looking at me with something closer to recognition, maybe even respect, or fear. At this point, the difference barely mattered. Margaret, I said, turning back to our new CEO, your first priority is performance-based evaluation. No politics, no favoritism. The people who deliver results stay. The rest go. This company is going to remember what it means to earn success, not inherit it. I walked past Dana without saying a word, leaving her standing there as the reality finally settled in. Her quiet husband hadn't just owned the company all along. He had completely rebuilt it in a single evening. I made it exactly 3 steps into our house before Dana erupted like a shaken bottle of champagne. She had beaten me home by about 20 minutes, likely ignoring every speed limit between downtown and our neighborhood. Now she was pacing the living room like a caged animal when I walked in. You embarrass me, she screamed, spinning around toward me, mascara streaking down her face. Do you have any idea what you've done? Everyone at work is talking about how I didn't even know who my own husband was. They think I'm either the worst wife in the world or a complete idiot. I loosened my tie and hung my jacket over the back of a chair, taking my time while she spiraled into a full-blown meltdown. Which one are you more worried about? I asked calmly. Don't you dare turn this around on me, she snapped, her voice cracking with emotion. I've spent years building my reputation at that company, years proving myself, and you just destroyed it all in one night. Margaret Wu is my boss now. Margaret, from engineering. Do you know how humiliating that is? About as humiliating as having your coworkers call your husband a loser while you laughed along. I replied, lowering myself onto the couch and watching her pace across our hardwood floor. She stopped mid-step, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find air. That's not. I didn't. It was just harmless office banter. Harmless. I repeated. Right. Travis calling me unemployed was harmless. Him asking what it's like to be a loser was harmless. You laughing when he said it was strange having your wife pay the bills. That was all just harmless fun. I laughed because it was awkward, she shot back, throwing her hands up. What was I supposed to do? Make a scene at a company dinner? Humiliate everyone? I leaned back into the couch cushions and really looked at her. This woman I had been married to for 15 years. The woman who was now standing in our living room, unraveling. Not because she had broken me, not because she realized she had misjudged me for years, but because her image had been damaged. You were supposed to defend your husband, I said quietly. You were supposed to tell Travis to shut his mouth and show some respect. You were supposed to act like you actually knew who you married. But I didn't know, she cried out, and finally, the truth burst out. I didn't know you still owned everything. You never said anything. You let me think you were just retired, living off investments and consulting work. You cooked dinner every night and fixed things around the house. And I thought, you thought I was a kept man? I finished for her. You thought you were the breadwinner supporting your unemployed husband. And that was fine with you, as long as nobody said it out loud. She sank onto the opposite end of the couch, her designer suit wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair falling loose. That's not fair. I never saw you that way. No, I asked, walking toward the window overlooking our backyard. You introduced me as someone who used to work in tech at every company event for years. You bought me a mug that says world's okayest husband. You told your mother I was going through a midlife crisis when I bought a motorcycle. Those were just jokes, she whispered. No, I said. Those were reflections of how you really saw me. And the moment Travis said it out loud, you laughed because it matched the story you already believed. Her crying continued behind me. Soft, broken sounds that would have once pulled me back immediately. But not anymore. I was just tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being treated like someone secondary in my own life. I wanted you to love me even if I had nothing, I said, still looking out into the yard where I'd spent countless Saturdays mowing the lawn while she worked late nights at the office. I wanted to know that if everything disappeared tomorrow, you'd still choose me. I paused, but the moment people thought I had nothing, they treated me like I was nothing, including you. Jordan, please, she sobbed. You laughed when they insulted me, I said. You sat in that ballroom wearing a dress I paid for, at a dinner celebrating a company I own, and you laughed when someone called your husband a loser. She was fully crying now, curled into herself on the couch like something broken. I'm sorry, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I didn't know. I turned around and looked at her properly for the first time without the instinct to comfort her. You didn't want to know, I said. Silence. What happens now? She asked softly. I looked at the woman who had shared my life for 15 years, who had built her career on a foundation she never understood, who had laughed at my humiliation while benefiting from my success. Now, I said, you learn who you're really married to, and I decide if I still want to be married to you. The weeks that followed at Nextra felt like watching a corporate phoenix rise from ashes. I began showing up at the office regularly for the first time in years, not as Dana's quiet husband, but as Jordan Rivers, the man who had been controlling everything from behind the curtain. The transformation was immediate. Margaret hit the ground running as CEO like she had been preparing for it her entire life. Within her first week, she introduced a genuine open-door policy, launched weekly all-hands meetings where employees could speak freely without fear, and began reviewing every contract and vendor agreement with strict scrutiny. The toxic culture that had grown under Arthur's leadership started disappearing almost immediately, like morning fog. Mr. Rivers, she said during one of our daily check-ins, I've never seen morale improve this quickly. People are actually excited to come to work again. She wasn't wrong. Walking through the office floors, the change was obvious. Employees were collaborating instead of competing. sharing ideas instead of guarding them like secrets. The cafeteria that had been silent for years was suddenly alive again, filled with conversation and laughter. Someone had even installed a decent sound system, and soft jazz played in the background during lunch. Travis's lawsuit collapsed exactly as Marcus had predicted. Faced with the mountain of evidence we had compiled about his nepotistic dealings and contract manipulation, his legal team advised him to settle quietly and move on. He disappeared into a mid-tier firm in Phoenix, likely telling anyone who would listen that he had been victimized by corporate politics. Meanwhile, Dana took a leave of absence. "I need time to process everything," she told me one morning over coffee, her voice distant and drained. "I need to figure out who I am if I'm not climbing the corporate ladder at Nextra." I didn't stop her. In truth, it was probably the right decision. Having her in the office would have made things complicated for everyone, especially since half the employees now knew she was married to the owner, while the rest were still trying to figure out how they had missed something so obvious. But the real turning point was the foundation I launched. The Jordan Rivers Foundation for Engineering Education, created to fund scholarships and mentorships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in technology. For years, I had written anonymous checks to different charities, quiet donations no one ever connected to me. Now I was attaching my name and my story to something that mattered. The first scholarship reception was held in Nextra's main conference room, the same space where I had fired Arthur just months earlier. 25 students from inner-city schools attended, along with their parents, teachers, and mentors. These weren't privileged kids with connections or safety nets. They were sharp, driven young people who simply needed someone to believe in them. I used to stay hidden in the background, signing checks and avoiding attention. Now I showed up, shook hands, listened to their stories, and showed them that hard work and respect could actually lead somewhere real. The most satisfying revenge was never punishment. It was building something better than what came before. 3 months later, I found myself back in the same Hilton ballroom where it had all begun. But everything felt different now. The corporate awards night Margaret had organized felt like stepping into another reality, one where respect actually meant something, and success was measured by impact instead of office politics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret said from the stage, confident and radiant in her role as CEO, "please welcome Jordan Rivers, the man who believed in Nextra before anyone else, and the visionary helping us build something truly meaningful." The applause that followed was real, warm, nothing like the mocking laughter that had once filled this same room. I walked to the front, passing tables of employees who now knew exactly who I was, the quiet man they had once overlooked, who had actually been responsible for all of it. No more whispered jokes about Dana's unemployed husband. No more smirks. No more dismissive laughter. They understood now that the invisible man had been the one holding everything together. Dana sat in the third row in a simple black dress, no longer her usual power suit armor. We were still married, technically, but something between us had fundamentally changed. She had started therapy, begun volunteering with the foundation, and was slowly learning to see me as more than just an extension of her career identity. Maybe it was too late. Maybe it wasn't. That was still unclear. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, looking out at faces filled with respect instead of ridicule. 3 months ago, some of you learned something surprising about the man standing here tonight. But the real surprise isn't that I owned this company all along. The real surprise is what we've built since then. I gestured toward Margaret, who stood proudly at my side. Under Margaret's leadership, Nextra has remembered what it means to actually solve problems instead of just talking about them. We've built a culture where ideas matter more than connections, where effort gets recognized, and where respect is not just a slogan. The foundation had already funded its first class of scholarship students, 15 promising young minds beginning their journey in engineering. The mentorship program had paired Nextra employees with students from underserved backgrounds, creating real pathways between ambition and opportunity. Looking around that ballroom, I understood something clearly. The sweetest revenge was never about destruction. It was about creation. It was about building something stronger, fairer, and better than what existed before. And in the end, the laughter had faded, not because it was silenced, but because it no longer mattered. What remained was something far more powerful, a legacy worth leaving behind.